You're listening to Contesting Wrestling. This is a podcast that, yes, it's about wrestling, but it's also about not liking wrestling. How can those two things exist together? Well, fuck you, is what I would say to that. It can. It's my podcast. What are you doing? You're just listening to it. We've gotten off on the wrong foot. Oh no, sorry.
I would argue that liking wrestling and not liking wrestling is kind of the standard.
It kind of seems within only a few episodes of this podcast when I was like, all right, like wrestling sometimes is really great, but it does seem like most of it is bad. My co-hosts were like, well, you now have the position that all wrestling fans have, so congratulations. If somehow this is the first time you've ever listened to this, you should know my name is Evan Burke, and I don't care for wrestling, but my two regular co-hosts are people who I've known for 20 plus years, who I love and respect very deeply, and they love wrestling. And because I could not understand that in my mind, I was like, we have to start a podcast in which you explain your position to me, because it seems nonsensical to be an adult in the world who's a reasonable human being and yet cares for wrestling. Now, my opinion has gone up and down over the time of this recording, and I've come to sometimes really enjoy it, and then other times feel a deep resentment in my heart towards myself for starting this project. And so it's complicated, but we're now in a phase where we're trying to get guests to come in and explain their position. And so I'm going to let my co-host go, and then we're going to introduce our guest today, who I am very excited to have, who is going to give us his unique position on wrestling.
All right, well, my name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been involved in professional wrestling for about a dozen years. I've done everything from wrestling to commentary to ring announcing to almost every job there's to do backstage. I know a bit about wrestling, and that's why I'm doing this podcast. Plus, I love Evan. I've been friend of his, as he said, for over 20 years. And let's just keep it on moving. Professor, tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce our guest.
I'm Dr. Ben Abelson, professor of philosophy at Mercy College, not a professor of time zones. But I am extremely happy to introduce our guest today, who is in the Midwest and is co-chair of the...
Oh, yeah. I thought you were going to go somewhere else.
Okay, co-chair for
He's
the
co-chair of the
Studies
Midwest.
area.
We've introduced co-ruler and warlord of the greater Milwaukee area. No.
Co-chair of the Wrestling Studies area of the Midwest Popular Culture and American Culture Association. PhD candidate in the English department at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. He is co-author of the book Possessed Women, Haunted States, Cultural Tensions in Exorcism Cinema, and co-editor of Making Sense of Cinema, Empirical Studies into Film Spectators and Spectatorship, Heroes, Heroines, and Everything in Between, Challenging Gender and Sexuality Stereotypes in Children's Entertainment Media. Christopher J. Olson, welcome to the Contesting Wrestling Podcast. Thanks for being here, Chris.
Well, hello. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm very much looking forward to this. And yes, I'm apparently not a PhD candidate of time zones either, because I didn't think to ask about that. So apologies.
Okay. I'm going to put this one on Ben. Don't worry. It's not you. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely on me.
As we say, any complaints, send it to @ScribeBen on Twitter.
And for the listeners, this will mean this episode might be slightly attenuated, but we'd be very happy to have Chris on another time to talk more.
He's saying it's going to be short.
Now,
short.
And just one other correction. Right now, I'm still PhD student. I haven't hit PhD candidate yet, but I take my prelim exams in 3 weeks, so we'll see.
Best of luck.
We'll see what happens after that.
All right, good luck on that. For sure.
Thanks.
Nope. Dude,
so thanks for having me.
So I'm thank you for doing this.
Is your dissertation about wrestling?
I'm not 100% sure what the dissertation is going to be about yet,
about wrestling.
But right now, because my area really, I mean, like I look at a lot of wrestling stuff, but my area is mainly like cult media and cult cult cinema, especially. I mean, I wrote a book called The 100 Greatest Cult Films, where I talked about some of my favorite cult movies. And there's a website that I'm a really big fan of called bynwr.com, which was created by the director Nicholas Winding Refn. And my dissertation is probably going to have something to do with that and like network digital archives and things like that. But wrestling, I do write about wrestling. I just delivered, Ben was in the audience for a presentation I gave on wrestling places, like where wrestling takes place and things like that. So I do write about wrestling as well. And in fact, my partner and I just released a book on the greatest cult TV shows of all time, and we included Lucha Underground in the list of greatest cult.
And that's Dr. Carrie Lynn Reinhardt, who has been on the show previously.
I recently played a video game that Nicholas Winding Refn had a very large role in, which was Death Stranding.
Death Stranding.
A beautiful, beautiful mess that I will defend to the death, while also pointing out its many, many flaws.
Welcome to Kojima fandom.
I am. I'm in now.
I was just gonna say.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, Refn repaid the favor by putting Kojima in his Amazon series "Too Old to Die Young." Kojima pops up in one episode.
So I think the concept of place really plays a role in the differences between the matches that we watched for this episode. Between, Full Sail, where the NXT match took place, and the Target Center in Minneapolis, where Elimination Chamber 2014 happened.
Now, before we dig into the meat of the episode today, Chris, I'm going to pose to you the question that I pose to all guests. That is an important part of my quest to understand wrestling more, which is, given all ways that one could spend one's limited time in this material plane, why wrestling? What is it about wrestling what is unique about it to you? Why do you spend your time with wrestling when you could be doing anything else?
I mean, that is a really great question, and it does kind of, like, for me, the way that I always frame wrestling when I tell people that I like wrestling, because a lot of times you'll tell people you like wrestling and they kind of have that reaction, like, what, why, what do you see in this? And I always tell them, it's like, wrestling is kind of the dumbest form of entertainment around, but if you can get on its wavelength, it can become super involving and become, just this like totally exciting, interesting art form. And I've been watching since I was a kid. I mean, that's when I got into it. Like, I can remember my dad ordering us like one of the WrestleMania pay-per-views and seeing, Hulk Hogan and all these other like larger than life characters that just really appealed to me as a child. And even like my dad took us to see live WWF at the time events in Green Bay, Wisconsin. This is when I lived in Upper Michigan. We made the trip to the big city of Green Bay to, see the Road Warriors take on Legion of Doom and to see Andre the Giant wrestle Big John Studd. I met Leap and Lanny Poffo as a child. Slick yelled at me once as a kid.
That's great. Slick is underrated.
I agree 100%. He was a great manager. And, I've been a fan ever since then, but I do tend to, like, my fandom tends to like ebb and flow. Like I'll be a really big fan for a while and then I'll kind of fall off, and then something will bring me back in, and then I'll be a fan for a while and then I'll fall off. And
that's pretty common. I find when I talk to people about wrestling, most people watched wrestling at some point in their lives. Some of them for longer than others, and whatever their opinion of it now is, they always want to talk to you about that point that they watched, and I find that interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even like for me, it's interesting because I've reached a point now where I don't want to talk about the stuff that I liked back then. I like talking about the stuff I like now, because I find it's like wrestling has gotten so diverse and dynamic and more interesting in recent years than it was before. I love the fact because when you're a kid, you see, it was mostly because WWF was such a big thing, and you would see the kind of guys that Vince McMahon prized, these big muscular dudes like Paul Orndorff or Hulk Hogan or Hercules Hernandez or those cats. And now it's like you just see such a range of people that are involved, and such a range of identities that are like being shown, and people are pushing the limits of like what wrestling can be. Like Lucha Underground was one of my favorite things because it took wrestling in so many different directions. It wasn't like a wrestling show. It was, a lot of people have described it as like a telenovela about a wrestling organization, and I love that. And I love that other companies are kind of like trying to incorporate that kind of aesthetic and that kind of, like taking things in really weird and different directions. And I like that a lot. I really think that's cool.
Yeah, we're doing like a whole series on Lucha Underground for our Patreon, largely because it's the only series that we could get Evan to watch consistently. And the matches for today, they're both from 2014, which is a really interesting year. For me, it's kind of the last year that I was a big WWE fan. It sort of marks the end of my like obsessive fandom about WWE. Like there's things that I've liked and have been interested in since then, but really the rise of Daniel Bryan to the world title at WrestleMania 30 was like that pretty much capped it off for me. At the same time, you had NXT was just really getting rolling at this time. And so I think one theme that might come up in this discussion is the failure of WWE to capitalize on the excitement generated in NXT when those wrestlers come up to the main roster. So let's actually start with the first match from NXT. I
just want to say one quick thing before we go, or before we get into that is I made that offhand comment about Death Stranding up top, but I think that actually, when you talk about like it's kind of the dumbest thing ever, but if you are willing to get to its wavelength, it has a lot to say. That is very much Death Stranding was my first entry into the Kojima verse, certainly, but it's like Death Stranding is in many ways an incredibly stupid game with a very like dumb story. He is the least subtle man to ever make art in any way, shape, or form. Like the metaphors aren't even really metaphors; they're just the thing.
Right.
But if you are willing to get there, and it's also in some ways the most boring game ever made, because it's like a game where you literally have to like it teaches you how to walk, and there's very active walking mechanics and all that shit. But if you are willing to get on in his boat, if you are willing to be like, all right, you know what, I'm gonna buy it. It was probably the most beautiful and meaningful experience I've ever had in a lifetime of playing video games.
I've heard I'm part of a group at UW Milwaukee. I'll plug it real quick. We're called Serious Play. We stream on Twitch, and we've had people who are really big fans. Like one of our faculty advisors is a really big Kojima fan, and he's been really pushing Death Stranding and talking about how weird it is, but also how great it is. And I think he would be completely on your wavelength. And that idea of like unsubtle entertainment, I think subtlety is often overpraised in entertainment. I mean, like I said, I'm a fan of Nicholas Winding Refn. I love his work. I've seen all of his movies. I've watched almost every episode of Too Old to Die Young so far, and he is not subtle at all. But I think he's great, and I love that. It works when it works.
On a recent premium episode, we watched Barton Fink, the great Coen Brothers movie, and in that we were talking about the Coen Brothers and then the Wachowskis. And it's like, yeah, because I love really subtle stuff, and I love a lot of things that other people interpret as pretentious, but to me it's just like somebody trying to be subtle or trying to be ambiguous. But there is a huge problem where people mistake subtlety for maturity, and people mistake subtlety for quality. And like I would say that the Wachowskis are I like their work as much as I like the Coen Brothers' work. What'd you say?
They've never made that mistake.
No, they have not.
No, not at all.
But
not
anyway,
that
so
thing.
let's get into the matches.
Let's get into the matches. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is from NXT Fatal 4-Way in 2014. It is a Fatal 4-Way match for the NXT Championship between Neville, Tyler Breeze, Tyson Kidd, and Sami Zayn. So, Chris, why don't you go ahead and tell us what you like particularly about this match, why you chose this for us to watch?
So this was about the year. I mean, this match and and the Shield Wyatt match that we're going to talk about. These are kind of the two of the matches that helped bring me back into the fold of wrestling. Like, I had not been watching wrestling. I think I kind of tapped out mid 2000s. I just wasn't into what I was seeing. You know, this was like shortly after WWE had acquired WCW, and they didn't have any competition, and they were just, you know, dropping the ball on so many people and so many characters, and I just didn't care. I just, you know, none of it was gripping me. And then around 2013, 2014, Carrie Lynn, my partner, she was kind of curious about wrestling because I had, you know, been a fan for so long, and she kind of started dipping her toes in and watching stuff. And then we discovered NXT on Hulu, and I started watching NXT and really like being like, oh, I don't know who these people are, but this is really cool, and I like this. And, you know, because I wasn't versed in a lot of the indie stuff at the time, because like I said, I just hadn't been watching wrestling for a while. So seeing a lot of these folks that I didn't know about, and seeing, you know, getting to know them as characters, whether it was Sami Zayn or whether it was Neville, and just seeing the things that they could do. Like, I'd never seen anybody do anything like you know, the what is Neville called, the Red Arrow. I've never seen anything like that in a wrestling ring, you know. And it was,
or Sami Zayn diving in between the ropes on the outside into a DDT. That shit is always just fantastic.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's dope as hell. And it's like, I had never seen that kind of stuff because I didn't grow up watching a lot of Japanese wrestling. I didn't watch a lot of Lucha Libre unless it was like, you know, like the movies with El Santo and stuff like that. That was kind of my introduction to Lucha Libre. So I wasn't, oh, and WCW, of course, you know, WCW and ECW bringing the Lucha style to the United States in the late 90s really helped as well.
But also, like, unlike the Indies and WCW even and ECW, these guys are trained so fucking well that they do everything incredibly crisply and safely as much as you can. And, like, the timing is impeccable. Like, so really, in terms of technique, it's never gotten better than NXT, really.
And yeah, and so following these characters, you know, because I started watching, I think, a few months before the Fatal 4-Way match that we're talking about, and just seeing the build up and you know, getting to know who Tyler Breeze was as a character, and seeing him come out with the selfie stick and all that stuff, and you know, seeing, like I said, the athleticism of Neville, and, you know, just the sort of like classic ring style that Tyson Kidd brought, and just Sami Zayn as kind of this plucky underdog, and being able to follow those characters for the few months that I did into that match, and knowing like their personalities, sitting down to watch that match became like super engrossing, especially for Carrie, because she got really into it. Like, I don't think I've ever seen anybody weep during a match before, but like, she was so emotionally invested, and it made it even better for me, especially when you get to that moment in the match. And I don't know if I should say this right now or not, but
go ahead.
But, you know, when Sami has the moment where he could hit Neville with the belt, and he decides not to, and it's like, oh, this is so great, you know, this stuff is all so good, and the storytelling is really well done, and the in-ring ability was just incredible. It all just really helped kind of reignite that passion that I had for wrestling.
And then later, Neville does not have the same integrity. He pulls the ref out of the ring when Sami's about to win, because he wants to keep his title. An ongoing theme in most of wrestling history is that those titles will corrupt you. You know, and I don't think that gets talked about enough. And certainly, because once you got it, you got to keep it.
I appreciated in this match the the sort of, there was a range of characters, kind of, where like I feel like, you know, from, you've got Sami Zayn, who I felt like I should be rooting for him, if nothing else, out of left solidarity, and also the fact that his deal at this time is clearly he's the most relatable guy. He's in the kind of shape that like, oh, I could probably get in that kind of shape. As opposed to other wrestlers where it's like, wow, that's a fantasy that I will never live out. He's the underdog. He gets the crowd to sing a full fucking 4 bars, which is like, that's huge. People have got to be like, there's like an actually semi-involved melody people have to carry for that.
The Full Sail crowd has sung some incredible melodies starting there. Pretty much starting with Sami Zayn, they have like really set the standard for crowd singing in that I've ever seen in any.
And you've got him, and then you had Neville, who I am familiar with. I've only seen him one other time, but it was in a match that is arguably my favorite match I have watched for this entire podcast, which was him as Pac versus Orange Cassidy. And I feel like he is, a bit more exaggerated of a character, but at least in this context is still, he's still a normal, or not a normal, but like he's still like a human who is just trying to be the champion and is just incredibly good at wrestling. I was the most technically impressed by him in this match. And then I ultimately think was rooting the most for Tyler, just because what a beautiful expression of a character. It's like such a simple pitch, right? It's just like, oh, he's the male model wrestler, and he expresses it beautifully, like really beautifully, and
he's doing Zoolander, but he's not doing Ben Stiller doing Zoolander. He's doing I'm the good-looking male model, and I'm going to kick you in the face with the beauty shot, and then I'm going to beat you. And I also look a lot better than all of the rest of my opponents.
It's like he stepped out of the parallel universe where there is a Zoolander cinematic universe that's been built up over the last 20 years. Which I would so much rather that than a Marvel Cinematic Universe, I have to be honest.
And don't forget Tyson Kidd.
The
last student of the Heart Dungeon.
I will choose to forget Tyler to him. I will choose to forget Tyson Kidd, actually, because I was not interested in him.
And Natty's husband, as the crowd won't let him forget.
I just want to say that in the lead up to that match, Tyson Kidd had my favorite promo of all the guys, where he was just like, you're going to watch this match that has, a great technical wrestler. You're going to watch this match that has a great high flyer. You're going to watch this match that has a plucky underdog who's ready to go in and fight. And then you're also going to see Sami Zayn, Adrian Neville, and Tyler Breeze. And it was like the way that he delivered it was so good. And that made me come around on him, because in the lead up I just didn't really care as much, but seeing that promo, it was like, okay, this guy is really funny.
What encapsulates him for me is he's putting the sharpshooter on and he shoves his hand in the person's face in order to turn it over, in order to get the move on, and he's just that kind of dick.
My single favorite moment in the match, and my single favorite moment of performance came from Neville, where towards the end of the match, when they do the 4-person Tower of Terror, or whatever the hell it's called, Tower of Doom,
yeah.
His selling of that, because they land and he's sitting up with a pretty neutral expression on his face, and then just falls over with that neutral expression. I thought that was as an isolated moment, that was my favorite thing I think that happened in all of this.
I think my favorite moment, because I remember jumping when I first saw it when it happened, because and this is a testament also to the good camera crew and editing they have there, is at one point in the middle of the match, you just see Tyler sailing into the screen, with his big finish, like the beauty shot kick, and he nails, I can't remember which people it's on, but he hits the beauty shot, gets up, immediately hits the second one of his opponents with the super kick, and then the third one of his opponents comes springboarding at him, and he drop kicks him, and for just a second, it's really like, they're going to go with Tyler. They're going to go with Tyler, and then he gets the 2 count, and then he throws the most amazing tantrum you've ever seen, because he knows, I should have gotten this. This should have been it. But no, Tyler, you didn't do it.
What's brilliant about that moment is he hits the beauty shot on Tyson Kidd. Then Neville comes springboarding in, and he drop kicks Neville, and he tries to pin Neville. If he had tried to pin Tyson Kidd first,
maybe
he might have gotten him, but he just made that one wrong choice.
Right. Oh, and he
that-
super kicked
that
Sami Zayn.
cost him.
He took out all three of them.
He got him first. Yeah.
This is the match that made me a Tyler Breeze fan. Like seeing the stuff that he was doing, like he was a great character, but then you see him in this match and it's like, this guy can go. And it was just incredible to see how he sort of emerged as this kind of workhorse in this match, and you were just like, holy crap.
And to talk about the crowd, the Full Sail crowd, right? They all have their little things that they like or dislike about each character. They have specific chants that that have just organically developed for each
That's
one.
what happens when you run the same building over and over again with a good product. The same people show up every week, and they can do things a little more complicated than 15,000-seat arenas across the country.
And half of them think Tyler's gorgeous, and the other half think, no, he's not.
And that's another thing that I love about this match in particular. Like the Full Sail crowd, I think gets a lot of people like to shit on the Full Sail crowd. I don't know if I can swear on the podcast.
Please.
Sorry if I.
Yeah,
Okay,
much as
good.
you like.
So I think a lot of people like shit on the Full Sail crowd for being obnoxious or whatever, and sometimes they kind of are. But man, they add something so much. And I think we're really seeing, in the COVID era, and I'm sure you guys have talked about this in the past, but, in the COVID era, I think we're really seeing like the importance of a wrestling crowd. And the Full Sail crowd, to me, like they have helped me get into matches in a way that maybe I wouldn't before. And it's the same thing like when I go to an indie show and, there's only like 300 people in the building or whatever, but when everybody's kind of on board and doing the chants or singing along or whatever, or if you're maybe the one guy who's like cheering for somebody and everybody else is kind of cheering for the other guy, there's just an affective response that I have. And that Full Sail crowd, man, when they start doing the chants, you're just like, yeah, you just really, really get involved.
Yeah, that's one destination. If, wrestling crowds come back eventually, that's one place I haven't been. And I'd love to experience the Full Sail crowd for sure. Now, the other match we talked about, so the Wyatt family of Bray Wyatt, Eric Rowan, and Luke Harper against the Shield of Dean Ambrose, Roman Reigns, and Seth Rollins from Elimination Chamber 2014 is in the Target Center in Minneapolis, which is more kind of your neck of the woods. Like, that's where the MPCA would have been this year if it wasn't on Zoom, right? Which also makes it that it was totally my fault that we had this time zone snafu, because I know that you're in the Midwest, and this match actually reminded me of that. Do you have you been to the Target Center? Or
I have not. I mean,
like that?
I've only been to recently I've only been to a handful of arenas, and most of them are kind of in my area. Like I've been to the Sears Arena or Sears Center, and now it's I think the Now Arena. I think they just recently changed the name, and the other big arena that I can't remember the name of here in Chicago. And I've been there for a couple of shows, and I haven't really like gone on a lot of pilgrimages to a lot of places so far. So no, I haven't been to the Target Center yet.
Well, how do you feel about arena wrestling compared to smaller scale?
I mean, and this kind of goes back to the paper that I talked about at MPCA, and I feel like there's a different response in like whether I'm at 121 Bourbon Street in Illinois to see an AAW show, because that's a venue that holds I think about 750, maybe fewer than that, or if I've been to like the Sears Center Arena, which holds about 13,000 people or so. That's where I saw, because I was at All In when they did that. So, there's a difference because of the size of the people. Like I remember being at All In, and there was like over 11,000 people in that arena. And when Chris Jericho like took off, like when he came out dressed up as Pentagon, and then he took the Pentagon mask off, I have never in my life heard anything that loud. Like the pop that people did, because it sounded like a jet taking off. It was just this insane, like just like it reverberated through your entire body. And it's different when you're at, a venue like 121 Bourbon Street where, you have a lot of people and they are getting into it, but it's not as overwhelming. But I do think that like both the big arenas and the small arenas, like when you get that crowd and they are really, getting invested and getting involved and doing dueling chants or whatever. Like I remember seeing Chris Hero versus Pentagon at Logan Square Arena. Now Logan Square only holds about 300 people or so. And that place was like it felt like the whole building was shaking as people were chanting, let's go hero, Cero Miedo, and it was like this dueling chant. So in that regard, I feel like there's a lot of commonality, but in those big arenas, it can be just so overwhelming to have that many people doing something that it does really hit you in a different way.
Right. It's harder to pull it off when there's that many people, right? But if you do, then it's a real spectacle. Yeah. And a effective, visceral spectacle as well.
And that's why I think I point to All In a lot for something like that, because All In, like that crowd was all in on everything that was going on, and it was just like I had never experienced anything quite like that.
Evan, All In was the event that sort of created AEW. Like it was the first successful event that the Elite put on that sort of allowed them to launch AEW.
Yeah, a longtime wrestling journalist Dave Meltzer had mentioned in his newsletter that he didn't think at the moment anybody but the WWE could draw 10,000 people in North America. And and the Young Bucks were like, I think if we got everybody we know together at an arena and promote it, we could do 10,000 people. And they did. And once they saw it was possible, people with money started to sign on like, oh, the indies have grown enough that we can invest in it. Let's do this. And they have.
So we've watched a bunch of Dean Ambrose versus Luke Harper or John Moxley versus Brody Lee matches recently. But this is a nice missing piece of the puzzle where they were in these rival gangs who really did dominate WWE for sort of the year previous. And this is pretty much the tail end of the Shield. But damn, what a well-structured brawl this whole match. Like every beat is exciting. The finish is kind of surprising. And I don't know, Evan, how did you feel about watching these two teams?
I got to be honest. You guys love John Moxley, and we've watched a lot of Moxley Ambrose stuff so far. I don't get it. I don't I don't hate him. In comparison to how I feel about the other members of the Shield, I don't hate him, but I don't really get what the thing is. And man, Seth Rollins and Rollins is, and Reigns, like I don't. Rollins, I understand why he is a black hole of charisma, right? Like I understand why he is like a void.
I mean, I agree. I think Doc also.
He's easily my least favorite of all these guys, except maybe Eric Rowan.
Whereas Reigns, I'm always.
Rowan. I like his fist thing, his fist headlock.
And like,
you're not a fan of his wines.
And like this, it's not even a like. It feels like it's not even part of his character that he sucks. It just feels like he sucks, and that's why it goes from character to character with him. Like we didn't like him on the Indies. Whereas Roman Reigns is somebody who I'm always surprised that he's a black hole of charisma. Like Roman Reigns is a guy who seems like I feel like I should care more. I maintain that if anybody from the WWE had listened to our wrestling podcast whose listenership is in the double digits in the last year, my idea that he should be Fireman Joe, the good-natured fireman who's helping everybody out and isn't aware of how sexy he is, that's the greatest way to use his character. I do not understand his character. I don't understand why we're supposed to care. I think wearing flak jackets just makes you look like you're LARPing.
Evan, just now, finally, over the last few weeks since Roman Reigns has come back, are finally changing his character. He's coming out now shirtless, so you can see his indeed chiseled physique and giant actual tribal tattoo.
move.
Instead of like trying to say wonky catchphrases, he's turned heel. They've put Paul Heyman with him, and his gimmick now is that he's the tribal chief. His entire family is in wrestling, and he's the one that's feeding all of them right now, so they'd better respect him along with everybody else. The rumor is that if crowds can come back, they want to finally try and get him to have a match with The Rock. Because The Rock can come back and be like, oh, you're the tribal chief, cousin? No, I'm The Rock. And that would be pretty good, I think. I think that would be pretty
Now,
good.
at the point of this
only
match,
took him
this is
6
before the
years.
crowd had turned on him. Everybody was really excited for Roman Reigns at this point. But they never, until just recently, they never developed his
And it's like one of
character
those
from
things
this
where it's
point.
like it's like I don't even need him to have a specific character. I just need him to not be this. Like, this is what shocks me. I was rooting for the Wyatts
So after all that,
so hard. And I will say, and here is my general feeling about this match, and I'm sorry if it's disappointing, but I went into this thinking like, well, at least I really don't like two of the people here, so I can like maybe watch them get beat. I just found myself just not compelled. I just found it not as much as I love Bray Wyatt. I think he's fucking great. As much as I really don't care for a lot of the Fiend's specific matches now, like I think that Bray Wyatt has a particular kind of wrestling talent that I haven't seen elsewhere before, and I think he is like a fucking genius. And also the fact that their theme song is like a lost track from a Jerry Cantrell solo album is fantastic.
Yeah.
But I could.
They got that from some actual band. I don't remember their name at this point, but like he
Cool.
found that song and wanted to use it. It wasn't like.
But
a
yeah,
WWE
I did like the end. It got me at the end. I did appreciate the end. I thought it was funny at the beginning when Seth Rollins was taking it was like he was playing Dark Souls, where he was just doing like dodge rolls around everybody the whole time. But yeah,
That's what he's
I
best at.
couldn't get as into the meat of this match as I could with the other one.
So, Chris, can you explain to Evan
Tell me
what's
why
so
I'm wrong,
great
Chris.
about this match?
Sure. I mean, I took notes because I watched it right before the podcast.
Post it.
Yeah, I took it on my little Post-it because that was all I had at hand. But here's why I like this match. I didn't really know because, like I said, this was at the time that I was kind of getting back into wrestling. I had not seen any of these cats on NXT at all. This was kind of my first exposure to all these people. Like I had not followed Tyler Black on the indies. I never watched Wrestling Society X, so I had not seen him there. I didn't.
We should probably show you that at some point, Evan. MTV's wrestling show.
Which was from some of the people who went on to do Lucha Underground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They made 10 half-hour episodes, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, because I've gone back and watched some, and yeah, it is absolutely ridiculous. But like, I didn't know these guys, but this match still like drew me in because it felt like there was like I didn't need a lot of context, other than what was here. You saw the audience reaction, the building. Like I think Jerry Lawler at one point, makes a comment. It's like they're chanting "This is awesome" before these guys even like are in the ring together. It's like the Wyatts are on the outside, the Shield is on the inside, and the crowd is losing their minds already. And I think another reason why I didn't need a lot of context is, this match has one of those like real sort of opposites clashing. You just look at the characters and you can see that they are, opposing, like an opposing dichotomy. You have, the Shield, who's not, their outfits aren't all exactly the same, but they are very much similar. They're wearing uniforms, and they look like, like jackbooted thugs. Basically, they're kind of representing order. And then you have the Wyatts, who have a similar aesthetic, but their outfits look just thrown together. They're very much like the embodiment of chaos. So you have like this clash already between order and chaos, and they just all, from the moment that they're in there, and Ambrose and I'm with you on Moxley. I like Moxley now, but there was like a really long stretch in WWE where every time he would come on, when I was watching like Raw or SmackDown or whatever, my eyes would just roll back into my head because I'm like, if I have to see that goddamn rebound clothesline one
The
more
wacky
time,
line.
yeah, or that like lazy jump to the outside, I don't care. And but watching this match, he's like this little bundle of energy. He's just like, they're holding him back. You got like Roman Reigns, who's the biggest guy, and he's just kind of standing there. And you got Ambrose, who's just like bouncing around, ready to fight, and Roman has to hold him back. Right before anything happens, these guys look like stars, and you know who their characters are, like immediately.
And there was a lot of great contrast in general in this match. You're right about that.
Yeah. And I think, a big part of it is, we talk about Ambrose, we talk about Roman Reigns and Rollins and the lack of charisma and all that stuff. I really feel like this match, it really demonstrated like that these guys, for me at least, they could be big stars, and it was before the WWE dropped the ball on them. It was like before Bray Wyatt was like losing every other match, even though they were trying to build him up as like the next big Undertaker or whatever, which I think they're finally kind of trying to do.
And WWE dropped the ball on almost everybody in all of these matches we have talked about today.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Other than like Rollins, unfortunately.
I wanted to pick up really quick on one thing that you pointed out at the beginning of what you were just saying, Chris. And this is something that I think Evan still doesn't quite get about wrestling, or like is sort of a lack in his way of approaching it and watching it. The first thing you mentioned was how the crowd was already reacting to the guys at the beginning of the match, and listening to the crowd. For me, wrestling is as much watching and listening to the crowd reactions and their attitudes as it is watching and listening to the guys in the ring, and like the dynamic between those things. And until and so I think you're sort of, if you're not really attending to how the crowd is reacting to things, there's an aspect of the art of the presentation that you're missing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my kind of go-to example is, and one of the guys is kind of problematic these days for a variety of reasons, but I saw a match between Michael Elgin and Juice Robinson at an AAW show. And Juice Robinson was in NXT. What was the character name in NXT? The
CJ Parker, the same name that Pamela Anderson had on Baywatch. And I actually, on this NXT show, just scrolling through, watched the CJ Parker Baron Corbin match. It was Baron Corbin's debut, and he squashed Parker in 20 seconds.
Yeah.
It's the reason Parker left.
Yep. And the crowd at this AAW show, like the section that I was sitting in, we were kind of cheering and chanting. Nobody else was. And it just killed the energy completely. If you don't have that, and I think that's why AEW was kind of smart, like around when the pandemic started, they were putting like their jobbers and some other people out in the crowd before they let other, like fans in.
Yeah.
Right.
And especially like having Austin Gunn at ringside, who is just like one of the loudest people I've ever heard, helped so much to sort of make those matches effective, because you had the cheering, you had the people sort of being involved. Whereas with WWE, when all this started, they were trying to just have the performers, and there was no sound, and it was like really weird, and just it took a really vital component out of the presentation, I think.
Unfortunately, due to our time constraints today, we are in the last few minutes. So, do you guys have some final thoughts about these matches, Chris?
Every time I see NXT from this era, I think I really want to just rewatch NXT from this era.
Oh, ditto. I mean, I remember going to see one of their first shows when they first left Full Sail in Chicago, and they had scheduled a show for that evening, and the show sold out before the tickets officially went on sale. So as a way to make up for things, they put another show in the afternoon. And Carrie and I waited 2 hours on the coldest day of the year in Chicago to see NXT in an arena that held about 5,000 people. And it was one of the best things I've ever seen. because that era, because this was like right after Finn Balor debuted. Like the main event was Finn Balor versus Sami Zayn. You had, Bayley taking on Sasha Banks. You had all this, just all these great matches. And yeah, going like that era, like 2014 to about, 2019 or so.
Fairly recently.
Yeah, that's what like pulled me back in when combined with things like Lucha Underground and AAW and other indie stuff. That's really what like pulled me back into wrestling, and I credit these matches for like helping make me a fan again.
I just want to break down real quick the finishes of the matches because they're both brilliant, I think. So in the 4-way, Sami Zayn hits the haluva kick. He gets the 2 count. Neville pulls the ref out of the ring. Sammy gets out there and is like, what the hell? Neville takes him down, goes to the top rope and hits the red arrow and wins it. So, you really like, you feel like Sammy's going to win the match, and then he doesn't, and Neville steals it from him. I also love the moment where Neville steals the dive. Sammy's about to do the dive, and Neville runs in and hits the moonsault right in front of him. And then for the Wyatt's match, Reigns makes his comeback. He Superman punches everybody. He's about to hit the spear on Wyatt. Harper runs in, takes the spear for Wyatt, which allows Wyatt to hit the Sister Abigail. Great, just undermining of expectations in both cases.
And it was right after they showed that the Sister Abigail could not get hit because Roman pried Wyatt's hands apart, which was the coolest thing he was doing at the time, and they dropped it from his character.
I just can I just add something real quick about one of the things that I like about that match is just the wrestling feels really dynamic and urgent in a way that WWE wrestling doesn't always feel. And that moment that Doc just mentioned with Roman, fighting his way out, it has, for me, one of the best moments is when Bray Wyatt headbutts Reigns and then headbutts him again, and Reigns just looks at him and screams this like guttural primal scream, and then just slams him with a Samoan drop. That is like, I pop, like even now, like before I came on for this
Samoan
podcast.
Wrestler.
What?
You don't headbutt a Samoan wrestler.
Yeah, exactly. But it just, when he throws him up on his shoulders and hits the Samoan drop, I popped just sitting here rewatching it before the podcast.
Chris, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter if you want, where I tend to complain about the Trump administration more than anything else. But
Great.
It's at Christopher Olson. Just take all the vowels out of Christopher.
Cool. Okay. All right, this has been Contesting Wrestling. Chris, we'll have to have you back on sometime when we remember how time works.
And thank you so much for being
here. Thanks for coming
on. Thank you guys for having me. This was great. I had fun.
This has been Contesting Wrestling. Thank you so much for listening. We love you.